Hello, and thanks for watching another edition of ARFCOM News. Today I want to tell you how we might just be able to get the ATF under control, the shocking quantity of guns bought in California, and their latest attempt to bring their microstamping law to life. But before we get started, I want to tell you about the cruelty-free, gluten-free, non-GMO, zero trans fat night vision products offered to you by our friends at tnvc.com. Just like Mom used to make. If you like seeing stuff more than not seeing stuff, take a look at our sponsor, tnvc.com, your source for quality night vision gear to make you the bump in the night. Let me tell you about some gun legislation I might be able to actually support. H.R. 1961 is a truly bipartisan bill which is intended to force the ATF into greater transparency and create an appeals process for agency opinions. Theoretically, this should force the Bureau to publicly articulate their rationale for positions, which should lead to far less arbitrary opinions, and it should also put a check on their flip-flopping and contradictory statements. I think many of us would probably not mind so much if they have restrictive opinions, so long as they stay consistent at least. If their position is that a pistol brace is a stock, I'm not happy about that, but it's a lot better than, yo, it's totally cool, bro. Never mind, fam, you can have one, but if it touches your shoulder, we'll totally throw you in federal prison.
No. We're going to federal pound me in the prison.
Wait, no, it's perfectly fine to shoulder a brace. Then again, maybe we will put you in prison if one rando agent decides the brace is too long for his stubby little T-Rex arms. Or the gun is too heavy for him to lift, or reasons and stuff, we think. Maybe. I don't know. As you are likely aware, and as we have covered many times in the past, F-Troop has a long history of arbitrary and capricious decisions on how it chooses to enforce federal law. Lots of folks erroneously refer to these opinions as rulings, which lends far more credibility to the letters than they really deserve. Every time the BATFE changes their collective mind on whether a brace is a shoulder stock, or whether silencer wipes or silencer parts, or just up and decides a shoelace is a machine gun, those letters have literally zero legal weight. None. Let me say that again. The ATF does not write law, and they are not a court. When they issue these opinions, all they are doing is saying they would be willing to arrest and charge a person under the conditions they give. But ultimately, it is for a court to decide whether the ATF's interpretation of law is valid. Under Chevron deference, the courts may grant significant leeway to the Bureau. But Chevron deference only applies to areas where statute is vague and requires the agency to make some attempt to comply with the spirit of the law. It also hasn't really been tested in the context of enumerated rights and conflicts strongly with intermediate scrutiny, let alone strict scrutiny. So while courts might be inclined to let the ATF interpret laws, they would only do so insofar as their interpretation is reasonable and only if the law itself is constitutional under intermediate scrutiny at the very least. So the ATF would be really rolling the dice if they decide to bring some of these cases to trial. They might not just get their interpretation slapped down. It's possible that any given case could result in huge swaths of United States code being found unconstitutional. That is, if they pressed on pistol braces, it is entirely possible a court could find it is unconstitutional for the NFA to place a de facto ban on short barrel rifles in the first place, considering they are in common use in all branches of the U.S. military, and U.S. versus Miller established the only reason Miller could be charged under the NFA was the specious claim that short barrel shotguns were not in common use or militarily useful. No, the ATF probably doesn't want to bring cases like that to court.
But I don't want that. And you don't want that. And Ringo here definitely doesn't want that.
What they want is to be able to stack charges in cases where the violation was more obvious. Like a guy gets caught with several pounds of meth in his cockfighting match while counterfeiting money, but he also has a pipe bomb and an AR with a brace. The feds have an extremely high conviction rate across the various alphabet agencies, and they're proud of it. They tend not to bring a case to trial unless they are really certain they will win. But these opinions do have the effect of chilling business and intimidating individual gun owners, and I believe that is the primary intent. H.R. 1961 is pretty new, and the text isn't published yet, but it is supported by SB Tactical and the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition. It was introduced by U.S. Representatives Dan Crenshaw and Henry Swalar. I'm not quite ready to unleash the almighty power of ARFCOM viewers before we see the full text of the bill, but it looks solid and we'll continue following it. I certainly wouldn't fault you for pushing your reps to vote for it, though, if you are so inclined. Long ago in the before times, in the year of our Lord 2019, the Firearms Policy Coalition filed a suit against California Attorney General Javier Basura, challenging California's ban on so-called assault weapons on Second Amendment grounds. You can track all the ins and outs of Miller versus Basura at assaultweaponlawsuit.com. As is typical, many motions were filed and considered in the intervening years, but the case is nearing a ruling. Back in February, the Honorable Roger Benitez ordered Basura to provide details on how many total guns were sold in California with a background check in 2020 and year-to-date in 2021. He also wanted the state to tell the court how many rifles, shotguns, pistols, and revolvers were sold, and how many new gun owners bought a gun for the first time. The Attorney General's office has complied and provided that data, and the numbers, well, they aren't exactly shocking. Californians bought a lot of guns. About 1.2 million total background checks resulted in a sale in 2020. Of course, that number represents every single firearm transaction that took place in the state of California, Stan, because all transactions are required to go through a dealer, and nobody ever breaks the law. The total number of rifles sold was about 300,000. The total number of shotguns was 160,000. 585,000 semi-auto pistols were sold and about 94,000 revolvers. Perhaps most interesting is that 369,511 people bought a gun legally for the very first time in California. What does all this mean? Well, it would be more illuminating if these figures existed for previous years to compare, but for the court's needs, that would have been superfluous. That said, Californistan's population in 2020 was 40 million, so that means almost 1% of the whole population bought guns for the first time last year. There is a pretty close overlap between eligible voters and legal gun owners, and there are about 25 million eligible voters in Californistan, so that means about 1.5% of the people who were allowed to buy guns did so for the first time last year. That is absolutely staggering. Another way of looking at it is that about 1/3 of the total number of guns sold went to people who bought guns for the first time. Any way you slice it, Calistani subjects bought a lot of guns, and FPC's Senior Director of Legal Operations, Adam Kraut, believes these numbers will be effective in proving the state's ban on so-called assault weapons is unconstitutional. Kraut said, "Now that the state's response is filed, we have no reason to believe that the court will not issue its final judgment without delay. FPC is proud to have fought for the rights of millions of individuals and human liberty in this potentially landmark lawsuit." If you want to do your part to help the FPC keep its herd of lawyers fed and watered, please pause the video right now and go to firearmspolicy.org/donate and give generously. Californistan has the nation's largest reserves of stupid, and it certainly isn't limited to bans on scallywag guns. Long ago, back in 2007, Calistani lawmakers forced a debacle called Microstamping on the poor subjects of Californistan. Like most stupid plans, the idea sounds pretty okay on the surface. You imprint a microscopic, unique identifier on each fired case, and that way cops can solve crimes on easy mode. But, like most stupid plans, it just isn't quite that simple. I'm sorry, that's a gross understatement. This segment is just stupid complicated, but I'll do my best to step through it all in a rational manner. Still, my apologies in advance if some of this is a little difficult to track. I don't make the news, I just report it. The law languished in limbo for years because it required the technology to be unencumbered by a patent, and the Cal Guns Foundation paid to keep the patent active. Eventually, the patent expired, but the law was still tied up in courts for the better part of a decade. Finally, in 2018, the Calisthani Supreme Court upheld the law, but even with the legal green light at the state level, there was still a mess of technical and practical problems. Oh yeah, and the law is due to be heard by St. Benitez in federal district court also. First, the law required the number to be stamped in at least 2 places. Doing it with the firing pin on the primer is pretty straightforward. I mean, sure, it can wear down with use, and carbon and other gunk could easily gum it up, making the impression illegible, but it's at least technically feasible. There isn't a really dependable way to imprint on a second location on the case, though. I mean, yeah, you could engrave a number on the inside of the chamber and let the pressure of firing impress it into the case, but if it sticks out far enough to ensure it imprints properly, it will absolutely interfere with extraction. But let's say manufacturers could just hand-wave the problem away with pixie dust and wishing. What happens when crooks use revolvers? Or when they file the numbers off? You could be really sneaky and whack somebody using a revolver, then salt the crime scene with brass recovered from a public shooting range, which would implicate some random innocent person. For that matter, you could have a perfect impression of a number on a case, and it still wouldn't do you any good to solve a crime if the gun was stolen. But manufacturers can't just wish the technical issues into the cornfield, so they simply refuse to introduce any new models to the Calisthani market. The law allowed them to continue selling other models, and there really wasn't any way for them to comply, so things were just kind of stuck for a while. But last year, Californistan amended the law so the impression only needed to be made in one place, and then switched it back again this year to leave the 2-location requirement in place until at least 2022. Even when that law expires and it goes back to 1 location again, assuming they don't flip again, that still leaves all the practical issues I just mentioned, and it still increases the cost of manufacture, but it's at least feasible. Still, manufacturers weren't interested in spending the money, so they still didn't bother introducing any new models with the feature. At this point, Calisthani politicrators are like stamping their feet and getting super upset that nobody wants to play with their new law. Or not so new law. So they came up with a plan. Like most gun control, the current law exempts the Praetorian Guard, but Assemblyman Jesse Gabriel introduced Assembly Bill 876 in order to remove that exemption. If passed, even police officers' guns would be subject to the microstamping requirement. In fact, it does not carry an exemption for older models of guns and simply requires that any duty pistol obtained after June of 2023 must be microstamped. The only exception is for revolvers, which, as I explained a moment ago, actually kind of makes sense. So this is the part where I usually tell you to fire up those phones and support or oppose a bill, but to be honest, I'm kind of conflicted on this one. I think microstamping is stupid, but I'm also opposed to any laws which exempt the enforcers. I guess it would be pretty cool to see what would happen if the gun industry locked arms in solidarity and refused to make any guns that could comply with the law, but I know that's just unicorn farts. It's also important to point out that whatever happens in California requiring microstamping will apply to whatever manufacturers decide to sell guns there, and it's not like they're going to make a model with microstamping and without. If they start making guns that have the microstamping feature, they're going to sell those guns everywhere, just like they did with models that have an internal lock. What do you guys think? Should we support or oppose this law? I want to hear your opinions, so comment down below. Well, friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy watching these things because I sure like making them for you. Would you like to know a secret to beating the ammo shortage? AR15.com/deals is constantly updated with scores on ammo, guns, and accessories so you can get the drop on the neckbeards before they snatch up all the good stuff. So bookmark AR15.com/deals and check AR15.com/deals every day. If you want to help us keep bringing you banger content like this, please support the folks who support us. Not only does TNVC.com give you night vision with that cool, refreshing, never bitter taste that goes down smooth, they also have mounts, lights, and all sorts of other gear to make you the bump in the night. And if you want a baller cap like mine or other ARFCOM swag, you can get it at brownells.com. Or you can buy fly shirts like this one in our Teespring store. Or if you'd like to try your luck and see if you can win your choice of rad shirt from our Teespring store, post a comment containing the phrase, "Here Daisy if you do," in the YouTube comments, and I will arbitrarily and unilaterally choose the best one. I love you. Like my coffee, like my women, cold and bitter.